Welcome. I'm Amy Taylor-Kabbaz, and this is the Happy Mama Movement podcast, a podcast dedicated to bringing the groundbreaking insights of matrescence to the world through interviews with leading experts, mamas, and those who are dedicated to making sure mothers are supported differently. These are our stories and your stories. Thank you for being a part of the Matrescence movement.
Hi, I'm Kirsten Calloran. I'm a matrescence coach and a lactation consultant based in County Wicklow in Ireland. I'm also a mum of two. The daughter who made me a mother, and a son who completely transformed how I understand what motherhood really is. What I want to share today is the story of that transformation, the unexpected journey into post-diagnosis motherhood, and the becoming that followed. Before my son was born, I thought I knew what motherhood was. I'd already had our daughter, and while it wasn't always easy, I'd found my rhythm. I trusted my gut. I could tune out the noise. I'd already done the sleepless nights, the toddler tantrums, the mama guilt, the milestones, and I'd survived it with my sense of self mostly intact. So I naively assumed that the second time round would be more of the same, just with maybe more rugby and fewer frilly dresses. I felt ready. I was calm. I knew who I was as a mother. That identity seemed fully anchored. But motherhood has a way of showing you the places where you're still unfinished. Now, at first, everything with my son was kind of familiar. He was bright and energetic, affectionate. I carried him through his babyhood with confidence. I knew how to soothe him, how to feed him, and how to trust myself. But then, when he was around 20 months old, something shifted. He started pulling away. Quietly at first, less eye contact, fewer shared moments, a growing distance I couldn't explain, but I couldn't ignore either. I remember watching him stare at spinning objects for long stretches. He stopped responding to his name. Something was different. And with that difference came a growing sense of disorientation. This wasn't what I'd expected. This wasn't what I prepared for. And suddenly, the map I'd followed with my daughter didn't apply anymore. I tried telling myself, he's just a bit quirky. Like maybe it's a boy thing. But something deeper in me, that maternal and ancient part, just knew something was changing. And not just in him. And that was the moment that everything cracked open. The path I thought we were walking, that one I'd prepared for, suddenly vanished. The motherhood I'd expected was slipping away, and no one around me even noticed. There was no big dramatic event, no medical crisis, just a quiet unraveling of everything I thought I understood about motherhood and about myself. We were in COVID lockdown at the time, and that made it even harder. There were no toddler groups. There was no family visiting. There was no informal support. My husband and I were isolated and fumbling through, piecing together a story that didn't even have a narrator. And I remember thinking, I don't have the luxury of falling apart right now. And so I did what many mothers do when they're scared. I got busy. I buried my fear beneath checklists. I read everything I could. I made appointments, I filled out forms, I researched specialists and developmental red flags. I became the expert on everything autism, but not myself. I told myself I was being strong, that my feelings could wait. There was no time for grief. There was no time for reflection. There was only forward motion. I didn't fall apart. I kind of froze. And in that freeze, I slowly disappeared. Because what no one tells you is that when your child receives a diagnosis, especially one that places them permanently outside of the typical, it isn't just their life that changes, it's yours too. Radically, permanently, often invisibly. You lose your script, you lose the map, and you find yourself in a version of motherhood no one prepared you for. One that requires fierce love, relentless energy, and a tolerance for uncertainty so high it borders on absurd. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was in survival mode. I was masking how hard it was, pushing down that grief and the fear. I was trying to be a good autism mum, which usually meant being endlessly patient, selfless, informed, and calm, while secretly falling apart inside. I didn't get mad. I got perfect. I smiled at therapists. I thanked professionals who barely knew my son. I rewrote my CV in my head to try and fit around his care needs. I said no to many social invitations. I found myself envying people with normal parenting problems, even the ones I'd cried about my first time around. And the whole time I kept wondering, where have I gone? So, sometime later, I was giving a talk for new moms in my role as a lactation consultant. One of the other speakers mentioned the word matrescence, this idea that motherhood is a process of transformation, not just a change in status, like adolescence, but for moms. And I felt something light up in my chest. This wasn't just stress. This wasn't me failing to bounce back. This was a metamorphosis. I recognized it immediately in the mothers I work with. Those early weeks of change and overwhelm when you have a newborn baby. But it wasn't until I did the Mama Rising training that I realized this wasn't just helpful for my clients. This was my story. This was the name for the unraveling that I had lived, the unraveling that I was still living. But even then, something didn't quite fit. Because most of the conversations around matrescence focus on early motherhood, your first baby, that first shift in identity, the push and pull between the old you and the new you. And that didn't really speak to my reality, which was like a second wave of becoming, the one that hit after my son's diagnosis, after the grief, after the advocacy, after the loneliness. And so that's when I started calling it post-diagnosis matrescence. Because I felt like what I had lived through and what so many mothers like me live through is a second transformation, a second matrescence. It's a deep identity shift brought on not by birth, but by the moment your child's future no longer fits the story you were told. It's the kind of transformation that happens in doctor's offices and school meetings, in Facebook groups you never thought you'd join because you didn't know they existed. In the long nights we spend Googling therapies, wondering what you're missing, and terrified you're not doing enough. It's that moment that you realize there really isn't a village for us. And if there is, you're not a part of it. It's the realization that most of the parenting world wasn't built for your child. That things like school, childcare, family support, none of that is guaranteed. You become the project manager, the translator, the advocate, and the protector, all before breakfast. And yet, still, you worry that you're not enough. No one talks about the grief that sits beside the love, or the rage that sits beneath the politeness, or the loss of autonomy, dreams, and identity that you absorb so silently people forget you were ever someone else. No one talks about how when your child can't speak, you start losing your voice too. How you censor yourself, soften the truth, say you're okay when you're anything but. But also, no one talks about how much beauty still exists in that space. Because even in the grief, there are moments of joy so sharp they bring you to your knees. I suppose matrescence for me gave a language to the chaos. It didn't fix things, but it validated them. It named the grief, the shifts, the self-silencing. It helped me to understand that I wasn't broken. I was becoming again. And what surprised me most was the more I honored my own becoming, the slow reckoning with who I was now, the stronger, calmer, and more connected I became to my son's world. The more I softened with myself, the more present I could be with him. The more I trusted my process, the more I could trust his. If I could go back and whisper something to myself in those early days, I'd say this. You don't need to be a superhero. You don't need to do it all right. What you're feeling is not failure, it's transformation. And yes, it really, really sucks. It's hard and it is so unfair. But you're not alone. There are so many of us quietly walking the same path, just waiting for someone to speak the truth out loud. So these days, I work with mothers who are in that second becoming. Mothers who've just received some sort of diagnosis for their child. Mothers who are scared and ashamed of how sad they feel. Mothers who love their children fiercely, but wonder where they themselves went. Mothers who feel like they've fallen into a life they never chose and are somehow supposed to be grateful for it. My job is to hold space for the grief and the rage and the beauty to all coexist. I help these mothers rediscover who they are now, not the version they were before children, not the version they thought they'd be, but the one they're quietly becoming, with tears and tenderness and deep, deep strength. Because I believe every mother of a disabled or neurodivergent child deserves a space where she isn't the helper, where she isn't a service user, where she isn't the advocate, the note taker, the therapist, or the strong one. That she just needs a space to breathe, to fall apart if needed. to remember who she is beyond survival mode. Because when we hold mothers, we hold entire families. I do this work because I remember what it felt like to be alone at my kitchen table with too many tabs open and no one to call. I remember the ache of trying to translate my child to the world while having no words for your own pain. And I do not want anyone else to feel that unseen. So my vision is simple, but radical. I want the concept of post-diagnosis matrescence to become part of the conversation around family support. I want to see maternal well-being included in a child's care plans. I want practitioners and therapists to look the mother in the eye and ask, "And how are you?" and actually mean it. I want healing spaces for all of us, not just services for our kids. Safe places where mothers can put down their armor and say, "This is who I am now. I didn't expect this life, but I'm still here. I'm still loving, and I'm still becoming." And for my own family, I want peace. We're still in the thick of it. We're still figuring things out. We're still fighting for support some days. But I also see how far we've come, how our love has stretched and softened, how even in the chaos, there's joy. There's resilience, there's connection, and there's hope. So if you're listening to this and you're in that same place, in that quiet fog of grief, the noise of the system, the invisible weight of holding it all, I hope you'll hear me when I say, you are not failing. You are not broken. You are not alone. You are still here. You are still worthy. And you are still beautifully, fiercely becoming. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you to Amy for allowing me the opportunity to take the mic. If my story has resonated with you, I would love to connect. All my details can be found in the show notes for this episode. Look after yourselves. You're doing better than you think.